Around 5,000 years ago, the ancient inhabitants of the Maltese Islands started an incredible megalithic building project, constructing many huge apsidal monuments that we now tend to refer to as temples, although we can't be sure exactly what they were for. Their design and much of the art and artifacts associated with them are unique facets of this isolated culture that lived in the central Mediterranean. There may have been as many as 100 temple sites spread out over the islands of Malta and Gozo. Several of these complexes survived the millennia pretty well and are open to the public today, giving people a glimpse into this intriguing group of ancient people. One of the most exciting sites is the Tarxien temple complex, which has no fewer than 4 temples connected to one another and was reused by a later Bronze Age people as a cremation cemetery. Today we're going to explore the megalithic wonders that are the Tarxien temples, and if you wait until the end, I'll show you my favourite, somewhat mysterious feature of them. Let me know what you think it was for. Today, as you approach the temples in the village of Tarxien, it's hard to imagine what this area looked like in the Neolithic. The site is compressed between a modern cemetery and many houses and apartment blocks, but not that long ago the area was rural, and it was actually a tenant farmer that discovered the temples while working the fields in 1913. Excavations began 2 years later, and it quickly became apparent that a Neolithic complex similar to the already discovered sites of Hajoim, Amnidra and Gigantea lay underneath the soil. The museum report of 1915 to 1916 details the casual circumstances in which it was found. What was even more fascinating for archaeologists at the time was that this new discovery was not the only megalithic complex in that area. The House Afflieni Hypogeum, that mysterious subterranean labyrinth I've talked about before, is around half a kilometre to the west of the Tarxien temples. By 1915 it had been excavated and was open to the public. Around 1 kilometre to the north of the Tarxien temples sits the Cordin III complex. In 1915, it was one of 3 temples close to one another, but Cordin I and Cordin II unfortunately did not survive into modern times. 1 kilometre to the southwest sits the partially excavated Santa Lucia Hypogeum. So this built-up, busy area comprising the villages of Tarxien and Paola, in spite of its rather rural existence at the turn of the 20th century, was a hub of activity during the Neolithic. Over the years, an interesting picture has emerged of a megalithic sanctuary that had been remodeled and added to over the years, which is why its layout is rather confusing, before being abandoned and then reused during the Bronze Age as a cremation cemetery. Tarxien is much more decorated than the other extant temple complexes. Spiral motifs and carvings of animals are found heavily concentrated in the South Temple, and this was also the location where a fascinating altar and the lower half of an enormous statue were found. The first temple to have been built was to the east of the site. Not much of it remains, but its rough apsidal structure can be made out, as well as the entrance and a paved corridor. Ignore the pit in the foreground, that's not Neolithic. This temple was built during the earliest megalithic period in Malta called the Gigantea phase between 3600 and 3200 BCE. It is oriented to the south. There are several scanty remains between this structure and the East Temple, including this feature here that looks like an entrance blocked off with a stone. This area may have been some sort of a courtyard. To the west of this courtyard is the East Temple, which was built during the Tarxien phase sometime after 3100 BCE. It has 2 pairs of apses and a rear niche and faces south-southwest. I took this video from the back of the East Temple. It's pretty devoid of decoration. There are burn marks on the uprights, just as in many parts of Tarxien. Since there are hearths in different parts of the temples, it's certain that fire was used in whatever activities were carried out here in the Neolithic, perhaps as part of ritual feasts. However, the red burn marks are everywhere, so there was probably a much bigger fire here at some point. whether as part of a ritual abandonment of the site or as the result of an accident. I took this video of the same temple from the front of it to the right. The East Temple was built at the same time as the South Temple, with both sharing the same orientation. They both have their own entrances. At some time later, the Central Temple was squeezed between them. It is the only Maltese temple to have as many as 6 apses and a rear niche, and it doesn't have its own entrance, being accessible from the South Temple, where an apse was modified to create this addition. Several of the Maltese temple sites show evidence of remodeling during their period of use, so this isn't unusual. At Amnidra, the last of the 3 temples to be built was also the central one, which was squeezed in between the other 2. Close to Amnidra, the Hajoim temple complex is unusual in that the main temple has both a front and a rear entrance, and this was likely the result of later modifications with the rear niche or apse being opened up. The monumental trilithon entrance to the South Temple was rebuilt in the 1960s. Just as with other Maltese megalithic temples, it's set into an extensive concave facade with a bench running alongside it. The South Temple has 5 apses and some of the most interesting furniture and features of all the Maltese temples. There are quite a few interesting features in the Tarxien temples. Walking between the East and the Central Temple, you come across this staircase, and it's not clear where it used to lead to. It's thought that the temples had roofs, even though none have survived, because partial corbelling can be seen in places. This suggests that they were 1 story in height, so it's possible the steps led to one of these roofs rather than another floor, or were another point of access to an apse. The pots on the floor are replicas of vessels that were found at the bottom of the stairs during excavations. It's hard to see in this video, but this wall is carved with a bull, a cow, and a pig suckling her young in low relief. Behind the small gap at the bottom of the wall, a bunch of animal bones were found. Interestingly, the cistern in the foreground predates the temple since it was covered with a torba floor when the central temple was built. I'm calling it a cistern, but no one really knows what it was for. It was completely empty when archaeologists discovered it. Walking between the Central Temple and the South Temple, there is a monolith with a pitted decoration in the middle of the chamber, the purpose of which is unknown. Just like in many of the temples, there's a small portal-type entrance to a chamber here on the left. These portals are small and impractical, so I do wonder what they represented and how they were used. In the Central Temple, there are 2 hearths that can be seen here. A large vessel, a trapezoid altar in the rear apse that's offset slightly from the corridor, and a decorated screen. The screen here is a replica since the original is in the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta. There are also several other enormous vessels that were uncovered from the Tarxien temples currently on display in the museum. Their size does suggest communal feasting. I took this video to try to illustrate the size of some of the paving slabs in the Central Temple. Notice also the stone ball underneath one of the megaliths. As you move from the Central Temple to the South Temple, you come across this heavily worn structure that was possibly an altar or something used in rituals or ceremonies. Similar furniture is found at other temple sites. It is in the rear apse of the temple on a raised paved platform, so it was likely the focal point for some sort of ritual activity. One of the things the temple people, as we often call them, are most famous for are their giant and small statues of corpulent people wearing pleated skirts and mostly with short hair cut into a bob. It's popularly thought that they depict mother goddesses, but we can't be sure. At the Tarxien temples, half of one huge example was found. This was situated in the South Temple alongside an altar carved with spiral motifs and a portal. Both the statue and the altar that can be seen today are replicas, with the originals on display in the museum. That little stone in the bottom part of the altar was found to cover a compartment containing a curved flint knife, flint chips, pottery sherds, marine shells, and partially charred animal bones. In the wall behind the altar, archaeologists also found a large deer antler and a footed bowl. Once again, this points towards ritual feasting, something that wasn't unusual at megalithic sites throughout Europe in the Neolithic and Bronze Age. The stone balls in varying sizes found at the Trilithon entrance to the South Temple are plentiful, and it's generally thought that they played a role in construction. Several were found underneath megaliths, so this does make sense. However, now let's discuss my favourite feature, which might explain some of the smaller stone balls. On the far right of the concave facade of the South Temple, there is this stone platform with a step in front of it and a ledge surrounding it. It contains 5 shallow circular depressions measuring around 30 centimeters in diameter, and 3 of its sides would have been surrounded by a high wall originally. A 6th shallow depression is carved into the right-hand ledge. When it was first discovered, it was suggested that many small stone balls found in its vicinity were probably associated with it in some way, either as a game or for the purpose of divination. It's also been suggested that it was used for grinding seeds or to depict the Southern Cross constellation that was visible in the Northern Hemisphere during the Neolithic. The stone bowl in front of it may also have been connected to it in some way. A matching platform also existed on the opposite end of the same facade, but only partially remains. Personally, I think the astronomical idea is a bit of a stretch, but I would like to think it wasn't for something as utilitarian as grinding seeds. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.